to the 75th edition of Before the Battle. I'm Nick Baldwin of BloodyElbow.com, and joining me, as always, Jed Meshew from MMAfighting.com. I should say the very pissed off Jed Meshew from MMAfighting.com.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Everything is good. Let's not even talk about it, dude. So we're going on.
Nothing has happened over the past, 4 days?
We're moving forward, Nick. We're moving forward. Leave it. Let's go.
Yes, because UFC Glasgow is so good, so we should talk all about that. That's what we were here for. Before we get to that, of course, got to introduce Wesley Riddle from MMAsucker.com. Wes, what's going on? How are you? No, that's pissed off, I would imagine.
I don't know. It's good to see you guys. I think we all just watched a pretty freaking stellar fight, and I guess what could be considered a fight of the year candidate between two durable warriors. I'm talking about we just saw Bellator 181 and saw a pretty fantastic war between Brandon Gertz and Derek Campos, and it had me on the edge of my seat. I was really glad that was able to happen. I didn't really expect it was going to be that good, being the trilogy fight, and the first fight wasn't really as thrilling as that one, but I enjoyed it. Put a cap off and made the day a little bit better.
Yeah, and I, for Jed to be as pissed off as he is, I mean, I got to imagine before watching this fight, because I mean, I would imagine that watching Campos Gertz 3 just an hour or a bit ago would have brightened your day, Jed, a little bit. So I'm kind of worried.
This is a legit fight of the year contender. And I'm about to hit you with a shameless plug. My podcast that I host with the Naked Gambler, The Naked Truth, we dropped our most recent episode last night, this morning. We actually discussed how this year has been basically devoid of good fights. Like the clear front runner for fight of the year, very likely going to end up being the fight of the year this year, is Michael Johnson, Justin Gaethje. That just happened, We're going to talk about how that just happened in a second here. But other than that, like the fights this year they just haven't been super great. And we did a deep dive into Tapology, looking around and seeing, what are the other contenders for fight of the year so far. And if you'll just indulge me for a brief second, I would like to point out to you what Tapology currently has ranked as the best, let's just say top 3 fights of the year so far. Number 3, Lando Venata versus David Tamar. Number 2, Augusto Mendez versus Frankie Saenz. And number 1, Andrade versus Hill. The way they do rankings, Gaethje Johnson will very likely make it to the top, but it kind of takes some time. But that's what we're working with here. Like, those are the 3 fights that are generally considered like amongst the best of the year. There's just not been a lot of great back and forth wars. Miller Poirier is the other one that comes to mind, but it ended weirdly, not unlike this one. So I definitely think this is a fight of the year contender, though.
It's the McGregor effect. When McGregor's in MMA and not defending the title, but still fighting MMA, fights are great. Going to boxing, the boxing fights have been great. What's his name? Joshua and Klitschko has been fantastic. Boxing has been doing really well. Wherever McGregor is, that's the sport that does fantastic. So
I don't feel like McGregor. So McGregor was in a couple of fight of the year contenders last year in MMA, but
I'm just saying his presence makes that sport.
You're just trying to get me fired. I don't know why you want to get me fired, but let's just move on from Conor.
I'm not trying to get you fired. I'm just trying to get you fired.
You're trying to get me fired. Yeah, and try and get me fired.
Maybe. All right, before you go batshit crazy on us. So let's talk about these results. Tough 25 finale. Michael Johnson, Justin Gaethje, best fight of the year. Fantastic stuff. Gaethje getting the job done. And following that night, Amanda Nunes, Valentina Shevchenko was canceled. UFC 213 headlined Yoel Romero, Robert Whittaker, middleweight interim title, and Whittaker takes the nod. He will now hopefully fight Michael Bisping to unify the belts later this year. Or GSP will mess that up. We'll see. But before we get to this card, coming up, UFC Fight Night 113 in Glasgow, Scotland. Gunnar Nelson, Santiago Ponzinibbio. Let's get to those results. Jed, DraftKings, our picks, and our performance night of the night bonuses. What you got for us?
So the DraftKings crown was taken, sir. It was taken the winner of DraftKings for the what's the Tough 25 is the one I was looking at. No, I don't want to brag. I don't want to be this guy, but I'm just saying the winner, this fella right here, you're looking at him in the face, in the flesh, Jed Meshew taking down the DraftKings title, finally upending the long tenured run of, I don't even know how many it was in a row for you, Nick. What was it? It was
I don't know. It was quite a number, but thankfully, we haven't even gotten there yet, but thankfully we're back on the Nick train already.
we're, all I'm saying
DraftKings
is
reign was over for 24 hours, but he's back on track. Nick Baldwin at the top. DraftKings.
All I'm saying is Tough 25. I won a commanding victory, over 100 points ahead of the Nick's nearest competitor. As far as I then did lose, but I lose under protest. I want that to be made clear. I lost, but I think we all know that Fabricio Verdum really won that fight. And had Verdum won the fight, I would have actually upended Nicholas. But because the judges are blind, deaf, or dumb, maybe a combination of all three.
And smart.
Just very clearly incorrect. Nick managed to eke out a victory, 315 to 307 over Wes Riddle. So Nick is back to the DraftKings champion, but you can't take my title reign from me. Much like Jermaine Duran to me, I will always have that belt in my trophy case. As far as picks go, let's take a look here. If you recall, we had a lot of similarities in our picks. Now, there was a little bit of shuffling for those following along. We made some behind-the-scenes switcheroos. The end result became my Tough 25 finale was terrible. I don't even have these added up at the point in time, but I've got 6 losses on my Tough. I definitely didn't win Tough 21, 2, 3, 4. Wes Riddle has 4 losses, and however many wins that would make on Tough, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So with 7 and 4, Wes is your Tough 25 pick winner. Congratulations, Wes. Nick, you did a little bit better than me. You went 6 and 5, and I went 5 and 6. It appears on Tough 24. I will say though, Wes, you did a cheap maneuver. You picked 4 Performance of the Night bonuses, and you miraculously didn't get a single one of them right. So, round of applause for Wes Riddle on that. As far as that goes, shocker of all shockers, Nick and I picked the obvious choice for Fight of the Night that Wes decided he didn't want to, and it turns out Justin Gaethje, Michael Johnson became Fight of the Year. Both of us are correct on our Fight of the Night predictions. Both of our Performance of the Nights for a Tough 25 finale didn't go our way. I had Diakiese Ishihara. You had Diakiese Cannonier. Wes, you had Cannonier, Hill, Diakiese, and Johnson, and came up a big goose egg on all of that. Moving on to 213. As we already established, congratulations to you, Nick. You are the DraftKings champion. Also, worthy of note, we're all super bad at the Performance/Fight of the Night game. None of us got a damn thing right on the Performance/Fight of the Night, although I will say a lot of that may have had to do with the fact that both Wes and I picked Noon Shevchenko as our fight of the evening, and the fight never even came about. So
that means it was a pretty goddamn awful fight.
Yeah, well, one could argue it's the best kind of fight, or the worst. But Wes also was a double loser in that category. He had Shevchenko as a Performance of the Night bonus winner. Unfortunately, that didn't turn out all that well for him. As far as
I was just gonna say, very rarely does one win 2 bonuses, and very rarely does Dana White hand out 4 performances. Yet Wes
was bold, and I respect the bold effort, Wes. Don't let Nick yuck your yum. You keep being you. As far as picks go, I went, let's tally this up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I went 8 and 3, which is that's a really strong showing, I'll have you know. I was strong enough to be equaled by Nicholas. You also went 8 and 3, but Wes made a lot of failures all weekend long. You can't really deny it, but he came up big in the last count, in the last one that mattered, with a stellar 9 and 2 performance at UFC 213. Wes is your current picks champion. Congratulations, fellas. You have the 2 belts, but I'm coming for him this week.
Boom. All right. And the performance of the night bonus belt is currently vacant as it usually is.
No, the performance belt, you and I are splitting it because Fight of the Night. We still have the belt. We both called Fight of the Night.
All right. And we never lost it per se from UFC 213. No, we just won it, right?
Exactly. Right. So it's like a DQ. We still get to keep the title.
All right, fair enough. I like your logic. I mean, as long as I get a belt, I mean, I'm down with the logic. Anyways,
you get half a belt. Half a belt.
Well, I'm coming for the other half this weekend. UFC Fight Night 113 live from Glasgow, Scotland this weekend. Not exactly a fantastic card. I'm looking a bit more forward to UFC 214 at the end of this month, and even Weidman Gastelum coming up next weekend. But
you don't say you're looking forward to 214.
I mean, sometimes I like to state the obvious a little bit.
Who would have guessed you're looking forward to one of the best events in recent memory? Shocker!
Over an awful fight night. All right.
3 title fights.
All right, before making any more fun of me, let's get into this card. UFC Fight Night 113, Glasgow, Scotland. As I said, a rare Sunday show starting with the early prelims on Fight Pass at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. And then the FS1 prelims we'll get to later, of course, 1 p.m. ET, 10 a.m. Pacific, and the FS1 main card, 3 p.m. ET, 12 p.m. Pacific. All right, first things first, Fight Pass early prelims. First fight of the night, we got Leslie the Peacemaker Smith taking on Amanda Lemos, a newcomer here. She's stepping up on short notice for Lena Landsberg, if I am not mistaken. Jed, Amanda Lemos, Leslie Smith. Smith last fought, what is her name? She last fought, very highly touted fighter.
Irene Aldana.
Aldana got the W there. Lemos, of course, as I said, 0-0 in the UFC. Who do you like here?
Well, the Irene Aldana fight is actually, I mean, I would pick her anyway just because of a lot of different factors, but I feel a little more comfortable after the Irene Aldana fight because Smith just looked better. She looked like she sort of improved her game beyond just being like a super tough brawler-esque fighter or whatever. Showed a lot of volume, a lot better move timing, power and stuff. So yeah, I'm taking Smith here. It's those factors. Lemos, what I know about Lemos, I didn't do a ton of research here, is she's former Jungle Fight champion. And she's tiny. She's going to be like way smaller here. I'm not sure the actual specifics, but I think she's giving up several inches in height and reach. And looks like she could be fighting at a weight division a little lower than she is. Looks like when 125 opens up, Lemos will be that. Probably can't make 115 because she's like thickly muscled. But yeah, she's like a stalker. And I just don't think she has the volume to keep up with Leslie Smith. I think grittiness, toughness, volume, and size is a good enough combination, along with pretty solid defensive wrestling, to keep her on the feet, turn this into a kickboxing match, and let her walk away the victor.
All right, Wes, Leslie Smith, the slight favorite going into this one, about 1.5 to 1, taking on the newcomer Brazilian Amanda Lemos.
Yeah, I don't really have too much else to add. Leslie Smith is going to be the bigger fighter in this fight. She's a little bit taller than Amanda Lemos, who is coming over and making her UFC debut. I noticed one of the biggest problems with Lemos, and it's not really a problem, but she likes to look for counter shots, but kind of going with that is that she circles quite a bit on the outside, and I think that Leslie Smith, with her experience, she's going to be intelligent enough with her aggressiveness and her output that she can be able to cut the corners that Lemos has if she tries to escape some of those different positions against the cage. And I don't think Lemos has ever fought a competitor who's had a better record than like 2-1. So a lot of the fighters that she's beat, I think like 3 or 4 on Tapology don't even have Tapology pages. So it's just a lot of unknowns with picking Lemos and Leslie Smith. She's had plenty of experience battling some of the best in the bantamweight division. So I'm going Leslie Smith. I think she'll take a decision. She has the capabilities to get a finish, but I didn't pick it because Lemos has never been finished before.
Yeah, I'm going Smith here as well. She's a bigger fighter, more experience, has the octagon experience. She's better, better of a fighter. She's very scrappy. She has more output, and Lemos, she is undefeated. She's 6-0-1, but I believe unless I'm mistaken, all of her opponents had either losing records or still, very, very small records, like 2-1, as Wes said. But I think someone said that she has fought all minus 500 fighters. So that's not very good.
Ooh,
and
that's super interesting. Now I want to know if it's true or not.
and so that's not very promising. Yeah, I'd like to know if I
That
am right
person
on that
lied
one.
to you.
They did? All right. Yeah, that's
Her record. Okay, so her record is 2 people who don't have any type of a page you can follow, like attached to, and like Brazilian super regional things, so like back of the gym smokers or whatever, and then 2 people who were making their debuts, so 0-0 fighters, a 2-0 and a 2-0-1 fighter. So yeah, like it ain't a powerful record of her, whatever it is, 6 opponents. It appears that there is a 4 collective wins between them, but yeah, it doesn't look like anybody actually has a losing record.
Yeah, well, I was half right, and it doesn't seem like Lemos is, she could be a world beater, but it's hard to say when she's fought very less, low caliber opponents. So I'm banking, I'm thinking she's probably not, and it's hard to trust a fighter like that, going into the UFC debut. So the pick is Smith. I don't think she finishes Lemos. She probably wins by decision, but nonetheless, Smith is the pick. And as I said, probably unanimous decision. Next up, we got a pretty interesting bantamweight matchup between Brett the Pikey Johns and Albert the Warrior Morales. It's the feature fight passer, the prelim. This is a short notice fight for Morales. He is stepping up for Mich Gagnon. Gagnon and Johns were supposed to fight, and Gagnon pulled out. Morales stepped up with, I want to say 2 weeks sounds about right as far as how short notice the fight is. Pretty good matchup, but Johns really good on the ground. Morales a bit more of a striker. Jed, who do you pick here? Johns a pretty big favorite.
I think I kind of want to say the line's a little bit long here. I am going to pick Brett Johns, and at the end of the day, it comes down to the short notice for Albert Morales. Brett Johns he's a grappler. Like let's just be honest. He shoots in a million takedowns per minute and gets them. He's an extremely effective takedown artist and works people over on top. He's still a developing striker. Like it's not his bread and butter. And what success he has there mostly comes as a result of like everybody knowing he's going to shoot in on their hips and having to kind of play around that. But he is bringing some like decided. Morales is the type of guy who could trouble him, and I would have been a lot more interested in this fight if Morales had like a full camp underneath him. Morales is a little bit bigger, not like a great deal amount. He's a very competent striker, has a little like some pop in his hands, and a really good defensive wrestler. And the last part's the part that makes a difference. If you can stuff Brett Johns, you're probably like if you can keep it on the feet against him. That's the type of guy who's going to give Johns a real problem, and sort of up in this, his like prospect hype train. And I think Morales might be able to do that early, but Johns is relentless. He is just physical, a specimen, and he's just going to keep coming. Morales is on short notice. I would favor Johns if Morales had a full camp, though I think it would be very close. So since he's coming in on such short notice, you got to give me Brett Johns to wrestle his way right on to either a decision or a 3rd round like TKO.
And I agree pretty much the same way. I'm actually going Brett Johns as well. He's been undefeated both professionally and amateurly. He's great timing on his takedowns, but the only real thing that I saw him struggle with in his UFC debut was kind of his cardio. He seemed to kind of slow down as the fight went later on, but then again, you have to think that that's going to play a factor when you're looking for consistent takedowns against a striker who, in Kwan Ho Kwak, who he did lose his last fight and did suffer by a knockout, but he's always been a pretty impressive striker. So Brett Johns was able to kind of neutralize that game by landing 11 takedowns in that fight. Albert Morales, you mentioned, Jed, that he's a competent striker. He's got pretty decent hands, and a lot of the times he likes to keep it on the feet, but sometimes he punches in one kind of bursts. And I've noticed with Morales as well, he kind of slows down as the fights go on. So I think what we're going to see Brett Johns go out there, start really strong, probably land some of those early takedowns like Alejandro Perez was able to do in their fight to steal one of the rounds. And I do think that Brett Johns is going to be able to get the victory here, probably a 30-27 unanimous or a 29-28, because I don't think Albert Morales has been finished in his career, and he's a pretty durable and up-and-coming guy. But I think that this is maybe just a little bit too early for Morales, just in a stylistic matchup. He is only 26, but Brett Johns at 25, he's still undefeated and has shown quite a bit of skills that I feel like could take him pretty far in the weight class. So I'm going Brett Johns. I haven't picked by decision, like I said, but Albert Morales, I wouldn't count him out. He's pretty tough and impressive striker. So like you mentioned, if he can stuff those takedowns, maybe he's got a shot.
Yeah, the pick here is Brett Johns as well. How everybody is picking the sizable favorite here, take him down, grind him out, maybe even lock in some sort of submission. Morales, it's a pretty clear matchup. Johns is the grappler, he's the wrestler in this matchup. Morales has better striking. Johns, all right striker, but Morales striking is actually really good. He's quite long, pretty crafty on the feet, but I can see this being a very frustrating matchup for the Warrior. I'm thinking Johns is able to take him down quite a bit. Morales' his takedown defense is all right, but Johns, I think this would probably be one of the better wrestlers Morales has faced in the UFC for sure. I'm just thinking back to his opponents. None of them have really been wrestlers. He's lost Almeida, drew with Perez, and then most recently beat Andre Sukumta. So yeah, no, this is sort of a new style matchup for Morales in the octagon. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he deals with the pressure and wrestling from Johns. I'm thinking, it's a close matchup. I'm surprised the odds are as wide as they are, but with Morales on short notice, the preparation won't be completely there. I'm thinking Johns gets this one done. I don't think he finishes. Morales is a really tough fighter, but Johns by decision is the pick, maybe even 30-27, but Morales might be able to get, keep it standing for a little while and win at least one round. But pick is Johns by unanimous decision. Next up, we got a bout between two newcomers, Danny Henry and Daniel Tamer. This, in general, wasn't a card, I don't think. Well, none of us are looking forward to it too much, and I'm not too sure if any of us know anything about either fighter. But I will go to you, Jed, first. Danny Henry, Daniel Tamer, do you know anything? If so, talk about it. If not, just flip a coin and pick a fighter.
I'm gonna actually pick the underdog here, Danny Henry. And I'm gonna pick him basically just because, for a couple of reasons. One, I think he's a little bit better of a counterpuncher. He's a substantially larger human being. He's like 7 inches taller than Daniel Tamer, gonna have a much bigger reach. And I'll let Wes get into this because he mentioned it beforehand and I didn't realize this, but Tamer got knocked out previously, essentially. He came back. Wes can talk about it, but Danny Henry seems to really have a great chin. He also seems to be a little more willing to wrestle than Daniel Tamer. So just kind of think he's a better counterpuncher, willing to take it to the ground as well. All that adds up to an underdog victory for me. Might as well. Let's have some fun. Let's roll the dice. Danny Henry by decision.
Yeah, Danny Henry, he actually had a pretty decent career back in the day. He competed in an organization called EFC, a pretty popular and up-and-coming prospect that I've heard from Scotland. So I feel like there's a lot of potential with Danny Henry. And what I was going to talk about with Daniel Tamer's situation, he is the brother of David Tamer, just in case you weren't able to figure it out. But he's undefeated. However, one of his fights that he did win should have been considered a loss. He actually fought a guy in this promotion named Amirik Yambi, and what ended up happening was he gets knocked out. And I say knocked out, but it may have been a little early, a little controversial, but he definitely was getting teed off on and was dropped in that fight. Well, he immediately protests to the referee, and the referee is like, you know what? After he pretty much already split them apart, and whoever it was, Amirik, was back in his corner celebrating, the ref was like, you know what? I'm going to let this fight go again, and which you're not allowed to do. I don't know why he did, but the fight was pretty much over. The ref kind of cheated his way into letting the fight go again, and Tamer ended up coming back, getting a takedown pretty immediately once the fight was restarted, and I think got a submission by rear naked choke. So some controversy in that just regarding his record. But just after watching a little bit of tape on both, I'm a little bit more impressed with Danny Henry. He's got a pretty developed mixed martial arts game, pretty impressive with his wrestling skills, pretty good when he gets in top control. And also he's got some variety in his kicks, which I like, pretty quick with him too. I kind of like his advantage a little bit over Daniel Tamer. I noticed that Daniel doesn't really have the speed in comparison to his brother, but definitely in comparison to Danny Henry. And Tamer really hasn't fought some of the best competition. I think Danny Henry has had a little bit more experience, one loss on his record, so maybe he was able to learn a little more from that back in March of last year. So I'm going Danny Henry as well. I have him picked by unanimous decision, and I think that he's going to be a fighter to maybe look out for. I feel like I've heard a little bit about him after doing a little bit of research with him, and there's quite a bit of people hyping him up. So it could be a good night for Danny.
I'm not going to pretend I know anything about either fighter. Tamer is the favorite, and odds makers know a bit more about this fight than I do. Tamer, his brother is pretty damn impressive, David Tamer. Again, from what I sort of have heard, Henry seems to be maybe a better grappler, Tamer a better striker. I think Tamer's a bit more well-rounded. The pick, Tamer, I don't know how. I'll say decision for Daniel Tamer. All right, next up we got Charlie Ward against newcomer Galore Bafando. I have no idea if I butchered that or not, but kind of confident in that pronunciation. Jed, Charlie Ward, or Bafando? Your mic is muted.
Sorry, I'm going to keep this super simple, super sweet. Bafando is an infinitely better everything. I don't say like better everything. Infinitely better athlete. Super dynamic guy. And frankly, I don't think too much Charlie Ward. Sort of a meat and potatoes, kind of a slugger. And this is one of those fights where, I mean, I would be pretty shocked if Bafando didn't style all over him. So, yeah, Bafando by early stoppage.
Yeah, I think the only reason Charlie Ward is in the UFC, maybe because partially the reason, or at least kept with the UFC, is because first off, Gunnar Nelson is in this main event, and he's a training partner of Gunnar and Connor and pretty much that whole crew. Charlie Ward didn't have a great UFC debut. He ended up getting knocked out really quick against a pretty devastating striker. But I'll tell you all this, I'm actually really impressed with Bafando's, some of his footage. He hasn't really been the most active fighter in recent years. He actually has not fought in 2 years. His last victory did come by knockout. But then again, his 2 losses actually came both by disqualification. One thing I like about Bafando, and I think that a lot of people are going to enjoy when he steps in the octagon this Sunday, is that he's really unorthodox with his striking. He's pretty much a very similar fighter to Alex Caceres in a way, and here competing in the welterweight division. He's got a variety of spinning techniques that he likes to throw, pretty crafty spinning hook kicks, and but he has really powerful hands. So I think people are going to be impressed with Bafando. I like his style. I like his skill. The only thing that could hurt him is that he hasn't fought in 2 years, but I think he'll be okay going up against a guy like Charlie Ward. So my pick is Bafando. I've got him picked by a first-round knockout.
Yeah, this is completely a fade on Charlie Ward. Ward is not a good fighter. Bafando, I know he's a bit of a power puncher. He seems to be pretty decent on the feet. I'm a bit worried about his 4-2 record going into the UFC. Not exactly great, to see that on paper. But if, Ward shouldn't be too tough of a test. Again, this isn't, that I'm super impressed with Bafando, but it's just a fade on Ward. The pick, Ward needs to probably score takedowns. I don't really see that happening, but that's probably his best path to victory because I don't see him outpointing Bafando on the feet. That'd be really, really surprising. So the pick is Bafando by knockout. I don't give much of a chance to Ireland's own Charlie Ward. So Bafando KO, round 1 or 2. All right, next up, Alexandre Pantoja taking on Neil Siri. This is Siri's last fight, unless plans have changed since I last heard about that. Pantoja was on TUF 24 last year. That was, of course, the flyweight season. Did pretty well on the show. Neil Siri, of course, vet. We all know who he is from Ireland, of course. Jed Pantoja, big favorite here against two-tap Neil Siri. Who's the pick?
Who did Pantoja lose to on the show? I don't remember at all. But he was like the favorite or whatever. He was like the number 1 seed, wasn't he?
I believe he was.
He lost to the gentleman that Tim Elliott beat in the finals. Hiramosa? because I don't know how to pronounce his name.
This doesn't make sense. I don't
Oh,
remember.
that sounds right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll take your word for it. So the odds on this are maybe a little long, mainly just because like Alexander Pantoja probably shouldn't be a minus 400-ish favorite over any warm body that can credibly stand in the UFC. And Neil Seery is definitely that. Like, you can knock Neil Seery for many things, but he's been around the block for a while, got some good wins over some good dudes. And, you know, even when he didn't, like, his record is one of those where it's like 16-2, doesn't entirely speak to like how good he is. Like, he didn't really trouble Kyoji Horiguchi, but Kyoji Horiguchi is like one of the 3 or 4 best flyweights in the world, and he went the distance and, like, you know, toughed it out. And so this is one of those fights for me, man, where I'm just like, okay, Neil Seery is really gritty, really hard-nosed kind of guy. Pantoja has sort of this like disjointed, weird game where it seems to me like he doesn't always make the smartest strategic or tactical decisions. I'm gonna pick him just because Neil Seery is like really not a very good defender of takedowns, and Pantoja is not a great wrestler, but that's really what he wants to do, is get you on the floor, work his submission game. And Seery's only defended like 50% of the shots taken at him. So if Pantoja just shoots twice, statistically, he's likely to end up on top, and then he can work his game. He shoots 2 times around, he should win, according to stats. So that's basically what I'm picking here. But I could totally see a world where Pantoja makes some really poor decisions and Neil Seery just kind of boxes him up on the feet, rides that wave of his retirement fight off into the sunset. So yeah, Pantoja by decision.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best pick to go. And you also kind of talked about it. Pantoja makes some tactical mistakes in some of his fights. The biggest one comes with his wrestling. He's really determined to get that takedown, but sometimes he leaves his lower body quite exposed when he's trying to think about what to do next, and he gets taken out quite a bit as well. Pantoja, he does only have 2 professional losses, though. His last loss actually came in 2010 to Jussier Formiga. But then again, his last loss came on the Ultimate Fighter 24 Champions season. I think that Pantoja is going to be pretty desperate for those takedowns and trying to work for submissions, because he's got a very, very prestigious career with his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's really good at taking the back, especially with fighters that aren't really being careful with standing back up to the feet. So Neil Seery, he's probably the oldest flyweight in the UFC. I think he's 37 years old or maybe 38. But then again, he's really durable for what he does. We haven't seen him compete too much frequently. His last fight did come back last year in May against Kyoji in a fight he lost, and before that, his last win came in October of 2015 over John De Los Reyes, who's not in the UFC anymore. He's a technical boxer, and I think it could go 2 ways. He's going to have a lot of hometown crowd cheering him on, and if Seery can keep it on the feet, I think his boxing technique can definitely get him a victory. Not saying Pantoja is a bad boxer, but Seery's just a little bit better in that technical aspect. Pantoja, I think, is going to be trying to look for those takedowns, which I think will be the more likely outcome, knowing that Seery only has a 55% takedown defense. And I think Pantoja can definitely get maybe some kind of submission or some kind of unanimous decision victory.
Yeah, I mean, Pantoja is a big favorite for a good reason. Again, the line could be a bit closer. Neil Seery is, a tough fighter. Very, he's a vet, and sometimes makes fights closer than they might even should be. I mean, go look at the Kyoji Horiguchi fight. I mean, Horiguchi is one of the best in the world, as Jed talked about, and Seery, he got outpointed pretty clearly, but hey, he still hung with him, so I give him credit, in that fight. And even was the Smoker fight a decision? I don't recall if I think Seery did actually tap in that one. I don't recall, but Pantoja should get the W here. He is pretty much better everywhere. Seery, he's getting up there in age. This is his retirement fight, and it probably should be. Pantoja, he's the fresher guy. He is, he's going to grapple Seery, and he'll find success in that department. He'll be able to take Seery down and grind out a victory. He's arguably, he could hang with Seery on the feet as well. So I think Pantoja probably wins anywhere the fight is. Seery's best chance is certainly on the feet. But Pantoja probably doesn't allow a lot of this fight to take place on the feet. It'll be a ground fight, and one that Pantoja will win pretty clearly. Pantoja, I'll say decision just because Series seems to hang in there against everybody, but I won't be surprised if we see a late sub. All right, headlining the FS1 TV prelims, we got Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts taking on Bobby Nasty Nash. What a terrible nickname from Bobby Nash. That is really, really atrocious. Jed, you like hot chocolate or nasty?
Who doesn't like hot chocolate? Except for it's the summer. I'm not really in on it right now. But I'm going to be taking Danny Roberts here. Just a couple. It's a really, really close fight in my opinion. I think Roberts has a couple of edges though. He's a southpaw. I always favor southpaws in general over orthodox fighters. It's not like a hard rule, but it like that old adage is true. It is much trickier to fight against a southpaw if you're an orthodox guy. But beyond that, I think he's got a little more volume on the feet. I think he's a little craftier, maybe a little quicker. Nash is going to bring more power, more aggression. If Nash lands something clean, it's going to be much more devastating. We've seen that Roberts can get knocked out, but it took Mike Perry a good long time before he could put the wood to him for real. I sort of suspect this fight looks a little bit like the Perry fight, only with Roberts having more success, Nash being a little overly aggressive, missing a lot more, getting hit a little bit more, and just having Roberts be just a little bit better of a fighter all around as far as a striker goes. And I don't suspect this goes to the ground at all. So, yeah, give me Danny Roberts by decision, I guess.
I'm actually going the other way. I've got Bobby Nash picked in this one. But I'm taking a little bit of a risk by picking him for a couple reasons. The biggest thing is that Bobby Nash has a pretty impressive wrestling background. He actually competed back at Michigan State University, I think, in wrestling. And Bobby Nash had quite a bit of victories back in his early days where he utilized quite a bit of wrestling to get the job done. But this is the reason I'm a little concerned about picking him. He made some tactical errors when he fought Li Jingliang. He was able to hurt him on the feet with strikes. He's a very, very powerful striker for being a predominant wrestler. And he also has 100% takedown defense. He's never been taken down before. I don't think in any of his fights ever that he's had in his mixed martial arts career. So he did show some of his striking abilities in that Jingliang fight. But he had abilities that he could have taken advantage of, such as Jingliang's poor takedown defense, to where he could have, if he wanted to, take the fight down to the ground and be able to work in some ground and pound, knowing that he did have the power, but he kept it on the feet, ended up getting knocked out by a guy who has a lot of power. Very similar, Danny Roberts has a lot of power in his hands, coming from a pretty impressive boxing background. And Danny Roberts had some decent shots in there against Mike Perry, not a whole lot, but he was able to land some counters in there that did make a little bit of sound, and until he got knocked out pretty bad in that third round. But he's got good body shots, but then again, not the best takedown defense. So I'm thinking if Bobby Nash can go out there and implement a good game plan to where he can utilize that wrestling, he can get the job done. But I think if we don't see Bobby Nash get those takedowns, Danny Hot Chocolate is going to be able to get the job done. But I'm going Bobby Nash. I'm hoping he can maybe switch in and utilize that wrestling a little bit, but we're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, my pick here is Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts. Not too confident. I think this is a relatively close fight, but I think Roberts will take this one somewhat clearly. I don't really see Nash getting this one to the mat. Maybe, I think he'll mostly strike with Roberts, but he could look for the takedowns, and that might even be his best path to victory, or more, easiest path to victory, so to speak, because Roberts is a striker himself and the better striker here. He's a bit more crisp on the feet, a bit more volume. We saw that in the Mike Perry fight, kind of up until he got knocked out in the third round. Bobby Nash got knocked up by Jingliang in his last fight. It was his debut, so maybe he doesn't have a fantastic chin, although Jingliang obviously hits very hard. Nash has a bit of pop to his punch as well. He rocked Jingliang in that fight before getting knocked out himself. So he's going to be the aggressor here on the feet, and again, this is mostly going to be a stand-up fight, I think. Nash is going to be the aggressor, but Roberts, I don't expect will wilt under that pressure. I think he'll be able to move and deliver his offense, his own offense, and I think it'll just be more than Nash. I think Nash is going to get a bit not crazy, but over aggressive. And I think Roberts lands something fairly significant after a striking clinic early. I think Roberts will put Nash away in the third round. All right. Kicking things off on FS1, the main card, we have a heavyweight bout between James Mulleron and Justin Willis, who, unless I don't remember, this is both their debuts. I know Willis has not fought in the UFC before. No, he hasn't.
They're both debuts.
Both debuts. It's heavyweight. Anything can happen pretty much. Jed, who is the pick?
Willis is way bigger. Mulheron is like a middleweight who's chubby. Like I know people say that about like Daniel Cormier, but really he really carries a bunch of extra weight around him, and he's only like 5'9" or 5'10", and like, he's nimble, he's quick, but he's not a heavyweight. And Willis is like 6'3" and has 10 inches of reach or something ridiculous here, and is like he's not a great striker, but he's working on it. He trains with a great camp in American Kickboxing Academy, and he's confident enough in his hands that he's not a total liability on the feet, although sometimes that can be a problem because he's confident enough in his hands, but he's not really that good on the feet, so he can get hit a lot. But at the same time, like, he's so much bigger here. He can literally just back Mulheron up against the cage and dump him onto the ground and like just out wrestle him and grind on him and just be a way bigger dude. So I expect him to just do big bank, tank little bank, and win this fight by early TKO. Yeah. Willis, if that wasn't clear, sorry.
Mulheron only has one loss on his record, but it was to Ruben Wolf, and Ruben Wolf has never really been the best competitor in mixed martial arts. He's actually only 11-10, and he hasn't been able to beat that great competition, but he was able to beat him in a rematch. But the biggest thing that I've noticed in this fight is that Mulheron, Jed, you mentioned it, Mulheron's going to be the quicker athlete, but kind of slows down as the fights go on, carries a lot of extra weight, but he doesn't really throw a lot of output. He likes to clinch a lot, and the biggest problem with clinching a lot going up against Justin Willis is knowing that Justin Willis is a pretty decent grappler and a pretty decent wrestler. So I think Justin Willis, he's got great, powerful hands, but he doesn't throw them at all with technique, kind of looping shots that aren't really that technical at all, that don't land sometimes. So, and then sometimes he may utilize it to try to push his opponent back, try to get him against the cage so he can look for a double leg takedown in there. But I think Justin Willis can get the job done. Knowing that Mulheron has been knocked out before by Ruben Wolf, I think Justin Willis has the ability to, if he can get a takedown in there, land some good ground and pound, because I've noticed with Mulheron, he's not the best when he gets off his back. The only thing that really saves him is that he has somewhat decent cardio. It's not great, but he's been able to outlast his opponents, and with that speed that he has, get victories in some of his fights. So I think that Justin Willis can hold him down, scores those takedowns, and get a second round TKO over that of James Mulheron.
Yeah, again, this is whatever. It's sort of not quite a flip a coin fight, because I think Justin Willis will take the win, but it's heavyweight, it's low level heavyweight, and that is a recipe for disaster a lot of the time. Willis is the pick, probably inside the distance. I'll say TKO in the second round. Just please don't go to the judges. That is all I want, or don't want, I should say. Willis, TKO is the pick. Don't know much. It could be quick. Hopefully it is, and it could be really, really boring on the other hand. Next up, we got a perfect definition of clash of styles. We got Khalil Roundtree Jr. and Paul Bearju Craig, USA versus Scotland. Pretty intriguing heavyweight matchup. Roundtree Jr., a solid -200 favorite. Craig +200 last time I checked. They might have switched, might have changed a little bit, but right around 2-1 for Roundtree. Yeah, -205 right now, +175 for Craig. Jed, Roundtree Jr. or Craig?
This was a little bit tough for me, because Roundtree is just like a better athlete, and I think he's much more likely in this fight to suddenly show up with like new tools in the bag, and just be a much better guy. but Craig is just a much more well-rounded fighter. He can kind of work in all phases. He's not like a phenomenal wrestler in general, but he's got a good jab. He can work in the clinch. His submission game, like he can threaten with submissions. And Roundtree he's very linear at this point in time. And I like the diversity in Daniel Craig. I like his ability to mix things up. I like his volume on the feet. Roundtree can definitely get caught into sort of picking one shot to explode into a little bit more, whereas Craig's going to work in combination. Craig's going to get hit a little bit more. Roundtree has more power here, but just all things considered, he's a little bit bigger, a little bit more skills at the moment. And yeah, give me the Bear Jew by, I guess, decision. Yeah, maybe a late stoppage, but I guess decision.
We talked about Bobby Nash versus Danny Roberts just a couple minutes ago. Between that fight and this fight, I think these are probably the two harder fights to call. This fight is kind of the stylistic matchup that you see where you got a striker and then you got a grappler. The striker, of course, being Khalil Roundtree. Khalil, he's had success in his career by getting victories by knockout, but we've seen consistent holes in his grappling, his clinch, and takedown wrestling defense. That just hasn't really been on his side. But one thing that I liked was that we saw a very emotional and a very confident Khalil Roundtree after he got his first UFC victory in his last fight over Daniel Jolly. I felt like that was kind of an eye-opener for him after he had suffered his first two losses in the UFC. He kind of thought, man, like I need to step my game up. But I feel like he kind of realized a little bit more who he was as a person. And I feel like Roundtree grew quite a bit after that fight. And you can go watch the interview. He's very passionate about the way he's trying to speak and very confident. He wants to improve his game. But it's hard to pick against Paul Craig. I like the guy. He's got a funny personality, a really funny personality. He was, I think he's a personal development school teacher in high school, which is pretty cool. And I guess pulling it on for the crowd back at home in Scotland. So he's definitely going to have the hometown advantage. Craig is going to probably look for those takedowns, but I'm actually going Khalil Roundtree. I have him picked by a first-round knockout, and the reason I picked first round is that I noticed Tyson Pedro was able to get the victory in that fight, who Tyson has the abilities to become a great light heavyweight at some point in the near future. But I do like Khalil's power. I think that he's got the advantage in that department to possibly, if he can stuff those takedowns, if we kind of like what we heard in his last fight, if he has worked quite a bit on his game and he's developed and worked really hard on not only his emotional status, but also his fight game and some of the holes that he's had, I think he can get the job done. So I'm going Khalil Roundtree.
Yeah, this is a tough one to call simply because it really comes down to where the fight takes place and where it goes early. Because this one, the safest bet here, if you were to bet this fight, well, besides like a hedge bet where you go Craig submission and Roundtree Jr. knockout, because I think one of those cashes for sure. Another good option is the under 1.5 at about minus 180 or so. Again, if you're a betting man, I think that could be the way to go. I know Jed's shaking his head. He picked late stoppage or decision, but I'd be pretty surprised if this goes over 1.5 rounds, and if not just one round. The pick is Khalil Roundtree Jr. Again, it all comes down to where does this take place? Does Craig get him down before getting knocked out, or does Roundtree Jr. knock him out before getting taken down? So, it's almost a coin flip fight. Roundtree, I don't know. I don't really have an explanation why. I think he'll knock Craig out because Craig doesn't have very good defense, but Roundtree doesn't have very good submission or wrestling defense, and Craig's a grappler. So, it really could go either way. The pick is Roundtree Jr., just a gut feeling that he'll take this one. But a finish is most likely on either side. As I said, the under should cash or the hedge, Craig submission or Roundtree knockout. I think that's the way to go. The pick here, though, is Khalil Roundtree Jr. by first round knockout. All right, next up, Jack Marshman, the Hammer, taking on Canadian Ryan James. We have South Wales taking on Canada. Jed, Jack Marshman, or Ryan James?
I feel like these odds are off, and I'm honestly tempted to take like one of the biggest underdogs on the card, maybe the biggest actually. I'm honestly like kind of tempted to take James here because he has an avenue to victory. Like I can't do it because like obviously people are not stupid. Like there's a reason that Marshman is as big a favorite as he is. But I don't know, man. Like he's a little bit bigger of a guy. He has a good jab, but he's not a good striker. Old James is. But he's a good submission grappler. I think he has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I'm not 100% sure about that. But we've seen Marshman have trouble before. Sedenblad kept him down on the ground for a little while. Obviously, he won that fight. But if James can work a takedown game here, then he could definitely win. And I think he can not get completely obliterated on the feet. Moreover, he's really like Ryan James is a very durable guy. So even if he is kind of catching a lot of heat on the feet, I think he can mostly just eat it up and walk on through that. But I mean, like you just can't pick. It's hard to pick against a minus 600 favorite. I guess the most likely scenario is Marshman keeps it on the feet, counter punches James's head off as he kind of walks forward, and James just gets a bunch of dingers bounced off his dome for the better part of 15 minutes. So give me Marshman by decision, but I was tempted.
All right. Oh, no.
Wes, what you got?
Oh,
we moved away from me asking you, and I forgot you forgot.
I forgot. Yeah, I was gonna let you talk. I'm actually going with Jack Marshman in this one, and I'll give kind of a couple reasons why. Nothing against Ron James, but I feel like that if this fight stays on the feet, we've never really seen Ron James have any real experience competing on the feet. He's usually a grappler trying to look for takedowns, trying to wrestle his way down to the ground and try to put in a good submission. But Jack Marshman, I think a lot of his losses in his career have actually come by knockout. I don't think he's ever been stopped by submission. And I think that he's been aware in some of his fights when he goes to the ground how to avoid those submissions. His last fight, he fought against Thiago Santos, who he actually had a couple moments in that first round before getting knocked out by a spinning hook kick in the second. His fight with Magnus Sedenblad, though, Marshman showed quite a bit of holes in his takedown defense. And on UFC.com's website, it says it's only 20%. Ryan James, like I mentioned, is pretty active with his grappling abilities and trying to get the fight down with his wrestling. So Ryan James, Jed, you mentioned it, he has a clear path to victory in a sense. If he can get the fight down to the ground, I think James can get the victory. But I'm thinking again, Marshman's never been stopped by submission. So if the fight stays on the feet, I don't think Ron James really has the technicality or the power to hang with Jack Marshman, knowing that he's pretty active with his output, but also a pretty powerful striker who's been able to land a lot of heavy shots and get quite a bit of knockouts in his career. So I'm going Jack Marshman. I haven't picked by a second-round knockout. I think he'll be the first person to stop Ron James via strikes.
Yeah, Marshman, I say it all the time. I mean, the line is a bit off. James isn't a terrible fighter. I don't think he's a great fighter by any means. He does have a path to victory, as Jed said. He needs to find a way to get this to the mat. I don't know what his takedowns I don't think are great. But if he finds a way to get this to the mat, whether it's a traditional wrestling takedown or something else, more of a BJJ takedown, he has a chance. He could tap out Marshman. I don't see that happening. I think Marshman is able to keep the standing because Marshman isn't terrible on the ground, so it's not like James is gonna or would run through Marshman on the mat. I don't really see that happening. Marshman, though, on the other hand, can run through James on the feet. I think there is a big striking advantage for the Hammer here. He's powerful. He's a bit smaller, but I don't think that really matters. I don't necessarily, James, his size advantage would come into play a little bit on the mat, just perhaps being the stronger guy, although Marshman is pretty strong himself. He's a bit more stocky. James a bit more just lengthy. Marshman, by knockouts, the pick. I think he's by far the better striker. I think he's able to hurt James, get on top, rain down some hammer fists. His nickname is the Hammer after all, and get a Let's go first round TKO. Could go a bit longer, but definitely inside 10 minutes. The pick though, Marshman TKO round number 1. All right, we move on to a very interesting lightweight matchup in one of the closest fights on the card. Stevie Braveheart Ray taking on Paul the Irish Dragon Felder. Jed, are you going with Scotland's own Stevie Ray, who is on a bit of a winning streak himself right now, or the Irish Dragon from the United States of America, Paul Felder?
I'm going with Stevie Ray for 2 reasons. Because, like you said, I think this might be the actual closest fight on the card. It is extremely competitive, and we were talking about this before we went live. This card really has 3 fights that anybody cares about. Like, the rest of the card is completely whatever. But the top 3 fights, the Ray Felder, the Cavillo Calderwood, and the Ponzinibbio Nelson, like those are excellent matchups. So this is a fight I am interested in. As far as why I'm picking Ray, I suspect this fight will mostly take place on the feet. Maybe you see a takedown. Either guy can shoot occasionally to mix it up. I might suspect you'd see Paul Felder shoot a couple more because Lozon had such success against Stevie Ray in Ray's last fight. And so he might see that as an opportunity. But predominantly it's going to be a striking battle. I think on the feet, honestly, I do believe Paul Felder is a little bit better just in general. I think his issue has always been one of aggression. I think he started to recognize that and throw a little more, move a little more, act like he gives a shit a little bit more. But on the other end of it, it's such a close fight. The difference here for me is twofold. I guess threefold. 1, Ray's a southpaw. Already talked about it. I do love picking me a southpaw. 2, I do think fighting in front of his home crowd is going to be an advantage here. Paul Felder had to fly over. This is sort of a weird fight week. It might be hard for him to kind of focus on his camp with all the circus things going around in the rest of the MMA world, where Stevie Ray is at home, ready to show out in front of all his friends and family. And 3, and most importantly, Stevie Ray is way younger. And so that it's just much more likely that he comes to this show with new tools in the bag, new tricks, just dramatically improved overall. Felder's probably the exact fighter we're going to see. Maybe he, adjusts the knobs on his various dials a little bit. He ratchets up his aggression some, but he's not really going to add a ton of new skills. I think Stevie Ray can add new skills, maybe come in, work on the legs a little bit, do some stick and moving against Paul Felder, and win a very close, maybe even a split decision here. The pick is Stevie Ray, though.
I do think a possible split decision is likely, but these two are really entertaining fighters. This sets up for possibly a fight of the night contender, which we'll get to a little bit later. But these two have the abilities to where they don't really look for takedowns in their fights. Paul Felder, he has a couple times, but it's usually against fighters who a little bit with their takedown defense. Stevie Ray always keeps it on the feet. He's only landed 2 out of numerous fights. I think he's probably had about 6 or 7 fights now. Let me take a look. 2, 4, 6 actually fights in the UFC. Paul Felder, I think a few more, but neither really look for takedowns that much, like I was saying. But the biggest thing that you mentioned, Jed, and one of the reasons I was going to touch on why I'm actually picking Stevie Ray in this fight is that he's going to have the hometown advantage. Stevie Ray has put together some pretty impressive victories. Another thing and another reason that I'm picking Stevie Ray is that I've been impressive with kind of what he's been able to put together with the striking abilities. I've noticed that Paul Felder tends to struggle a little bit with actually strikers, even though that we've seen Paul Felder get quite a bit of knockouts and also succeed quite a bit with the striking abilities. But Felder has lost to strikers in his career, and Stevie Ray has been able to beat pretty much any striker that he's faced. And his biggest hole is grappling and wrestling. So if Felder, who is probably not going to be looking for those takedowns, if Stevie Ray can keep it on the feet, I do think that Ray's conditioning is better than Paul Felder. I think that he has the ability to continuously go no matter kind of what slows him down. As we saw in the Joe Lozon fight, he had a very, very strong third round. In the Alan Patrick fight, he seemed definitely like the fresher fighter. As the fight went on, Ross Pearson, he had a fantastic third round against him. So quite a bit of the fights that he's had, that third round seems to be a pretty important factor. And I think that Stevie Ray has the ability to take over as the fight goes on. So I do think that this could be a close fight. I'm going to be picking Stevie Ray. I have him by unanimous decision. Probably 29-28 unanimous, but then again, this could be a very close decision. I wouldn't be surprised if Felder can take it, but sometimes Felder becomes predictable, and Stevie Ray has quite a bit of tools to where I think he can be the more unpredictable guy in front of his hometown crowd and get the decision nod.
Yeah, this is a close matchup, as both of you said, and I've kind of gone back and forth. But I've been high on Paul Felder, but for a lot of his fights. But I've started to realize it's like he's not getting better, and the hype is sort of going down and down. He's very underwhelming at times. I guess after putting on a striking clinic against Edson Barboza, still in defeat, but still looking really good in that fight. He earlier on knocked out over Danny Castillo. We expected big things from Felder. We just haven't seen that. He's been kind of, he does a lot of nothing. He throws a lot of spinning stuff, but not a ton lands, and it's just a lot of nothing. Stevie Ray, a bit more bread and butter, not bread and butter, but just the fundamentals. He has that down a bit better than Felder. I think he's a bit more active, or I should say he lands more. Felder, he throws a lot, as I said, but Ray, I think lands a bit more. I think the volume, as far as, again, actually offense that lands, will be there for Ray. I don't think this will go to the ground. I think if it does, Ray could be looking for takedowns. If he finds himself getting outpointed by Felder on the feet, he might go in to try and get this to the mat. He probably has the advantage just because Felder really has very little there on the mat. Ray has at least a couple wins by sub. None of the UFC, that is. Ray, though, again, it's a close fight. I think I just can't count on Felder anymore. I've done it too much. I mean, the biggest example I recall is the Ross Pearson fight. Felder coming up short in that one. I mean, it seemed like everybody was going, Felder's going to start Ross Pearson. Pearson's done. And Pearson pulls it off. A pretty clear decision there. Felder did very little in that fight. That's the biggest example. And ever since then, I kind of have been off the Felder hype train. Stevie Ray has been doing pretty well. The Joe Lozon fight was a bit controversial as far as him winning. He did pretty well earlier this year against Pearson, though. I like Stevie Ray as far as what he brings to the table. I think he gets the job done. It'll be a close fight, but I think he does a bit more on the feet and gets a 29-28 unanimous decision victory. All right, that brings us to the co-main event of UFC Fight Night 113. That is Joanne Jojo Calderwood and Cynthia Calvillo. The Calvillo, of course, training out of Team Alpha Male, very hyped up. Kind of reminding me of Paige Van Zandt in a way, as far as them rushing her into the rankings in big spots and big fights. And Calvillo, it might be different. Calvillo is looking really good. She's 2-0 in her first couple appearances in the octagon. Calderwood has a lot more experience. And experience in the UFC, more experience that is as well. Both fighters are decent everywhere. Decent on the feet, decent on the mat. Jed, do you like Calderwood or Calvillo, who is about a 2-1 favorite? Somewhat surprisingly.
I'm taking Calvillo here for a couple of reasons. One, I am sort of high on her. I mean, I think she's being rushed a little bit, but she sort of does have a long career. She's been in the game like 5 or 6 years at this point. I know she had a pretty long amateur career. It's just her professional career. I think her professional career started last year. I could be wrong on that, so don't
I believe you're right. Yeah.
But I think that I remember when she made her debut, we were talking about how she had this long amateur career, 3 or 4 years in the amateurs, and then she just made her professional career, and 6 months later got the call up to the UFC, and came in, and she is already. This is her third fight in the UFC this year, maybe fourth. She's been super active, and that's one of the reasons here I'm taking her. Calderwood hasn't fought in almost a year. Her last outing was the submission loss to Jessica Andrade. I do like an active fighter. I mean, the outlines of this are pretty clear. Calvillo is not lost on the feet, but she's a Team Alpha Male scrambler, and she doesn't scramble in the same way they scramble, but she's a very adept ground fighter with a knack for getting her finding the submission, especially in transition or just getting a back taker, what have you. Calderwood is not. Calderwood is a striker. Like, that's what she wants to do. She is a super high output, pretty good at maintaining range. She's got a nice little like front teep kick or whatever she used really effectively against Valerie Letourneau. Sorry. And like, that's a weapon that could help her here. For JoJo, this fight is all about staying on her feet. If she can keep it on the feet, I think she's got the volume and the craft. Like, she's just going to beat up Cynthia Calvillo. But and while she's a decent defensive wrestler, I think Calvillo is just sort of riding this wave of momentum that I don't want to get off the train. I want to ride the wave with her. And Calderwood, Calderwood's been tapped out like 2-3 times. I can't recall. Her losses have all been submissions as far as I'm aware, and they were all early. And
it was Andrade and the big upset to Rose. So yeah, you're right. She has 2 pro losses.
And then didn't she also lose in the house by sub
lost
too?
To Rose Namajunas.
Wasn't that a sub though?
A sub.
It was, yeah. So like, it's clear that that's why they made this matchup. And I think Calvillo has. She is a spark plug, man. She's ready to get out there and get after it, and I think she's going to be able to find a way to force some type of a scramble, a transition, and in that she's going to snatch something up, and Calderwood's going to tap early. Give me Cynthia Calvillo by first round submission.
I think that when we saw Cynthia Calvillo make her UFC debut, we thought it was a little bit premature because they pushed her up there on the main card, but I feel like it actually was a pretty decent mood. I feel like she's gained a pretty decent fan base. I feel like a lot of people are enjoying her performances. She seems to be a pretty impressive athlete. As you mentioned, she did have a pretty lengthy amateur career. And actually, I said in the chat, she actually fought her last amateur fight over Aspen Ladd, who just got sick the other week, who was supposed to fight Jessica Ai. That was in 2014. And then she had pretty much a 2-year plus gap between her last amateur fight and her first professional fight. And that happened back in 2016, which was just last year in August. So it's only July. She's about to fight Joanne Calderwood in a co-main event after having made her amateur or her professional debut less than a year ago. But she's very, very impressive. Calvillo's already come a long way. I actually like her in this fight as well. The biggest thing that you mentioned was JoJo does not really have the best grappling defense, and she's never really had the best takedown defense. Now, a lot of the times, Calderwood, she likes to shoot for takedowns, but the fighters that she's taken down in the UFC are Valerie Letourneau, who didn't fit the weight class at all, who's now in Bellator, Courtney Casey, who does not really have the best takedown defense as we've seen, and Seohee Ham, who is way undersized for the weight class. So Calderwood was able to capitalize on those and get her victories, and those were her last 3 victories. Did have a pretty impressive career back in the days of Invicta. She was able to put together some pretty impressive victories there, but I do think Calvillo's a little bit better of a fighter. Calvillo's shown an impressive striking game. She actually, in the UFC, has landed 97 of her punches on the feet, which is very, very good, or at least 97 of what she's thrown via punch. Not really active when she gets to the ground too much, though, which Calderwood may be able to utilize that to get back up to the feet, but Calderwood gets hit a lot, doesn't have the best takedown defense, and doesn't have the best submission defense going up against an up-and-comer like Calvillo, who happens to be the older fighter in this one. I think, maybe I'm wrong. Actually, Calderwood is 1 year older, but they're both in their 30s now, very young in their 30s, however. But I do think Calvillo is a little bit more evolved. And I feel like she's starting to put together a pretty impressive game, and I think she's going to be able to get the job done. I picked the decision. I do like your pick, though, Jed, going with the submission. The first round is definitely possible. I thought maybe we could see Calderwood hold her own for a little bit, being in front of a hometown crowd, but we'll see. Calvillo has the abilities to get a submission, but I'm going to lean a decision in her favor.
This is somewhat of a close fight just because Calvillo, she doesn't have tons of experience. She's only 5-0. Calderwood has a number of fights in the UFC. Calvillo only has 2. Although Calvillo has been active as of late, Calderwood not so much. She's coming in almost close to a year. It's been September of last year. That was the Overeem Stipe card. So it's been a little while since we've seen JoJo, and she's a fighter where it's like she's been in the game enough where I don't know how much better she's going to get. I kind of get the feeling what we've seen is just who Joanne Calderwood is, where Cynthia Calvillo training at Team Alpha Male, she, as Wes said, I was surprised to hear that she's already in her 30s. Fight years, she's not. Calderwood, I can see that. It makes sense. Calvillo, though, she is getting better, I would imagine. I haven't seen her train, but I expect to see steps and progress from Calvillo throughout her career. This is a bit of a big step up. I think they should have maybe given her a bit of a lesser opponent, although it will probably in hindsight we'll be thinking, all right, this was a good step up. She got the W, and now she can go on to bigger and better things. But it is a big bit, it's a decent, I think it's a fair step up just because Calderwood, she is coming off a loss and she has been upset before. But in general, Calderwood is a pretty solid fighter. Calvillo, though, should be able to expose Calderwood's grappling deficiencies and her lack of defense on the mat and in the takedown department. I think Calvillo should be able to get her down to the mat, and after a bit of back and forth grappling, that Calvillo is getting the better of, certainly, and a bit of top control. I think Calderwood survives for a little while, but I think Calvillo eventually gets a tap. I'll say Cynthia Calvillo, submission in round number 2. All right, that brings us to the main event of the evening, a pivotal welterweight matchup between number 8 and number 14, Gunny Nelson and Santiago Gentaboa Ponzinibbio. Really intriguing matchup. Obviously, you have a grappler here and a striker, and that's kind of the gist of this fight. And the winner will go on to fight another top 10 guy. Ponzinibbio wins, he'll be in the top 10 for the first time. Nelson wins, he'll keep his ranking most likely of number 8 and move on to another top 10 guy. Jed, are you going with Iceland's own Gunnar Nelson or Argentina's own Santiago Ponzinibbio?
I'm going to take Ponzi scheme here, but I do it with a lot of trepidation. I think this is a very close fight, and 5 rounds makes it more likely maybe that Gunnar Nelson is able to get this fight to the floor and from there do very Gunnar Nelson-y things. But to me, this basically, I also want to say very clearly, I'm super bad at picking Gunnar Nelson fights. His game shouldn't work, but he finds ways to make it work. He has very, very little process. He doesn't throw a great volume of strikes. He's got that weird out karate stance, and then he leaps in and throws one punch around, but it's pretty accurate. He's a good takedown. He's a good takedown artist with very good entries, considering he stands 80 feet away from his opponent, which is pretty impressive. And he's a real strong dude and crafty. But I always look at him fight and think this shouldn't be working. And so I don't know if maybe I just can't get past that mental block. And so I'll always think that Gunnar Nelson's game shouldn't work, even though it clearly does. But to me, Ponzinibbio throws much more volume on the feet. He's much better at pressuring and throws, I would say, more power in general than Gunnar Nelson, though we have seen Gunnar Nelson knock some people out, put some dudes on skates. But this just comes down to me really. I think if this stays on the feet, Gunnar Nelson is going to lose in one fashion or another. He has to be able to work takedowns to win. And Ponzinibbio is honestly a pretty decent takedown, pretty decent defensive wrestler. His first UFC outing, Ryan LaFleur took him down basically at will. But since then, he's only given up a handful of takedowns over the course of 6 or 7 fights in the UFC, and he's steadily getting better. Court McGee is not a brilliant wrestler, but he's a dogged wrestler, and I know that fight only lasted not even a full round, but Ponzinibbio didn't let him get him down. Zach Cummings maybe got him down, once. Nordine Taleb is not trying to shoot takedowns on him, obviously, but we've just seen him get better at defending takedowns. I think he comes into this fight very clearly aware that, okay, I need to defend the takedown to win this fight. Like he needs to get the takedown to win. He's going to work on that a lot. And I think he's going to be able to keep it on the feet. I think his power, aggression, just volume is going to rack up points. Maybe he can put hands on Gunnar Nelson enough to I mean, this is 5 rounds, so maybe he puts enough hands on him to get a late stoppage. But we haven't ever seen Gunny, as to my recollection, we haven't even seen him hurt. So, and I could be wrong. Feel free to tell me about that. I have a gut feeling that I'm gonna feel like a jackass, and Gunny's gonna like Brandon Thatch's ass. But my head just says that Ponzi scheme should be able to keep this on the feet and win on volume. So Ponzinibbio by decision.
I do like that pick. And one thing that I've noticed is that I feel like a lot of people overlook Santiago Ponzinibbio. I feel like out of all the welterweights that are there in the UFC that are probably ranked in the top 15, he actually might be the most overlooked, even though he's built quite an impressive resume. He's been able to beat some pretty decent competition, but also do it in impressive fashion. He's currently on a 4-fight win streak. His only 2 UFC losses were to Lorenz Larkin, which was a fantastic fight. And then his first fight, as you mentioned, Jed, was to Ron LaFleur, which he got taken down relentlessly, but that was his UFC debut coming in. Hadn't really fought the greatest competition, so I felt like it was good that he had a chance to kind of work on that. And I feel like that was a pretty good motivator for the rest of his career. From that moment on, before that, his only loss was to Leandro Mafra, who also did compete in the UFC at one point, and has beat some, not the greatest competition, but that was earlier in his career. I like Ponzinibbio, and there's a couple reasons I've been tempted to pick him. One of the biggest things is that when you look at Gunnar Nelson, what has he been able to do? He gets a lot of submissions. His submission skills are fantastic. The way that he's able to control you when he gets down to the mat and try to work to grab the back, along with the way that he fights kind of lanky and long. He utilizes his reach really well. As you mentioned again, Jed, the way that he shoots for takedowns from such long ranges is very impressive. I feel like we haven't seen any fighters be that successful with such a long gap between himself and his opponent. So Gunnar Nelson has been able to utilize that really well. But again, going back to the submission thing, people actually, I feel like, don't really know this, but Ponzinibbio is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He has never been submitted in his career. He is a predominant striker. He doesn't like to look for takedowns, but having that background with him, he's, I feel like, intelligent enough to possibly be able to defend some of the submission threats that Gunnar Nelson could pose, especially if Gunnar's the one initiating the takedowns, because I do think Nelson can initiate those takedowns, being pretty effective in the times that he scores them. But Ponzinibbio, I feel like, has the intelligence enough to be careful if he's going to try to stand back up to the feet. Back, as we saw kind of in the Ryan LaFleur fight. Besides that, Ponzinibbio, hasn't really been taken down too much. I think Zach Cummins was able to once in that fight, once or twice, but it really had no effect on Ponzinibbio. He was able to stand up and keep going again. But I do think that this fight, being a course of 5 rounds, can definitely play into Gunnar Nelson's advantage. Nelson did struggle a little bit in the Rick Story fight as that fight progressed, but I don't really trust Ponzinibbio's cardio, as we haven't really had a chance to see it too much in the extensions of full fights, despite having a pretty good 3rd round in this fight with Zach Cummings, along with his fight in his last outing against Nordine Taleb. So I feel like that 25-minute fight, let's say Gunnar Nelson's not able to get the submission, not able to get the takedown, Ponzinibbio might be the stronger starter, knowing that he does have that power in his hands, along with being a very successful striker with a decent amount of output. Not really the most we've ever seen, but very technical in the way that he puts it together. I think that Gunnar Nelson can take the fight as it goes on. I was tempted to pick Gunnar Nelson by submission, but I've kind of rethought about it. I don't know if he's going to have the abilities to submit Ponzinibbio. But then again, this is mixed martial arts. It's not going to be a BJJ competition. So I don't think that I mean, it could play a factor with Gunnar's fantastic grappling abilities. But as I mentioned, Ponzinibbio is a BJJ black belt and knows what he's doing. I feel like that he's going to be able to defend those threats that are on the ground if Gunnar gets him down. But I do think Gunnar will be able to get him down in the fight. But Ponzinibbio definitely could have worked on those takedown defenses. But Gunnar having a hometown crowd advantage, and I say hometown, but probably more so just people cheering him on, being closer to the area that he's from and trains with. I think Gunnar Nelson's going to be able to have that support to get the job done over Ponzinibbio. So I'm actually going to change my pick from a submission that I had for, I think, a 4th round. I'm going to change it to a decision. I think Gunnar will maybe lose that 1st round, maybe even that 2nd, but I do think that Nelson can take over as the fight goes on due to his advantage in the cardio department, but also his wear and tear in wrestling. If he's able to get him down, I think he can wear him out because he does have great control. And I don't know if Ponzinibbio is going to be able to get back up to the feet. So for those reasons, kind of all together, I'm going to be going Gunnar Nelson by a decision. I'm going to say a 49-46 across the board.
This is a pretty close fight and a fight I'm looking forward to. It's a pretty clear fight. If Santiago Ponzinibbio can defend the takedowns, and I didn't know that he was a BJJ black belt. So if you are correct, Russ, I mean that's kind of an interesting point in this matchup, just because that makes me believe that maybe he can defend the takedowns, or at the very least defend submission attempts from Nelson a bit better than if he wasn't as accomplished on the mat as he is apparently. On the other hand, he's still we don't really see that, which is again in hindsight a bit surprising. But he's a striker, and that is pretty much all we've seen. We haven't really seen Ponzinibbio tested on the mat, other than I guess the one fight I just looked at his UFC record, and the one fight that I didn't watch, I don't think I've ever actually seen, was the Ponzinibbio LaFleur fight. So I don't know. I doubt LaFleur took him down in that one. I guess if you guys remember it, you can clarify. But we haven't really seen much of Ponzinibbio's ground game. So it's hard to just say, oh, he's a black belt. All right, Gunnar Nelson's not going to win. Ponzinibbio's going to keep him on feet. So I have to, it's tough. Nelson, he's still a weird fighter just because I like what Jed said. It's like he shouldn't be finding the success he does just because he's still not a fantastic striker. He's still a bit odd in a way, but he gets the job done, and he's still, he's turned into a legit fighter. I didn't think he was fantastic early on. I mean, I faded him a little bit. I picked Thatch against him, which in hindsight was a terrible, terrible pick. But I've started to get back on the Nelson train. Tapping out Albert Tunov was really big, and his last win over Alan Joban, he looked really impressive in. This is a different matchup simply because Ponzinibbio is so goddamn good on the feet. He's very, very sharp, very precise, and he has a lot of power. He has a lot of volume, but a lot of power, and so that is something, what makes him so deadly on the feet. My one concern for Ponzinibbio is, other than, defending the takedowns and whether or not that, he'll be able to do so, is the cardio. We've never seen Ponzinibbio in a main event fight before. Nelson has had 5-round fights. The Rick Story one, I don't recall. That might be the only one he's had, but he has gone the distance before. I would imagine his cardio is slightly better than Ponzinibbio. Ponzinibbio, as a power puncher, seems to use quite a bit of energy throughout 3-rounders. So I'm thinking Nelson will do well if it goes to championship rounds. The pick is Gunnar Nelson. I think he will find his way to the mat. Standing up, Ponzinibbio wins all day. On the mat, Gunnar Nelson wins all day. I think, again, keep in mind, Ponzinibbio could be underrated on the mat. We've never really seen him there that much. The pick is Nelson. I think Ponzinibbio will fade. I like Ponzinibbio as a fighter a lot. I think he's really good and top 15 worthy, but this is not a great matchup for him, especially over the course of 5 rounds. I think that's the really big key here. If it was 3 rounds, it'd be a bit closer, but Nelson, late submission, I'll say in the 4th round is the pick. Ponzinibbio gets tired and eventually won't be able to defend the submission attempts nearly as well as he was in the early rounds. Nelson, 4th round submission is the pick. That does it for UFC Fight Night 113 for going through the card. Now let's get to our bonuses, and then we'll round out with our DraftKings team, and that is all. Wes, we'll go to you for fight of the night and performance of the night. Who do you got?
Yeah, I haven't been too good at this in the past few months, but I
Ever?
looking at the main event. Well, I started off pretty good, and I used to be able to predict these pretty well, but not anymore. I think Gunnar Nelson will get one if he gets a finish, but since I just changed my pick, I'm not going to pick one for him. What I will do, I'm going to pick Ponzinibbio Gunnar Nelson as the fight of the night because I do think that it could be pretty back and forth if Ponzinibbio has some advantages and moments on the feet. I think the top three and maybe a Danny Roberts Bobby Nash fight could pose as threats for a fight of the night bonus. My performance of the nights, I will give one to. Let me look at who I picked real quick. I'm just going to stick with my picks that I have by finish, which unfortunately isn't that many, and they're more than likely not going to be right. But I'm going to go Jack Marshman. Actually, I take that back. Khalil Roundtree is who I meant to say. I think he could knock out Paul Craig, and if he do, he could do it in impressive fashion. So maybe Khalil Roundtree. And my second one, I'm going to go on the limb and go Galore Bafando. As I mentioned, he's really unorthodox with his striking, and you can go watch a lot of his tapes. He's throws a lot of variety in his kicks and spinning stuff. So maybe he's able to pull off some kind of spinning hook kick knockout like he's done actually in the past, or some kind of spinning back fist, or just some kind of crazy kick. I think he has a good chance to maybe get one if he does something impressive in his fight over Charlie Ward.
Alrighty, Jed. Bonuses, performance of the night, Friday night. Who are you dishing out 50K to?
Fight of the night, I'm taking Stevie Ray Paul Felder. I already wrote it down, so I'm going to stick by it. I sort of regret it because my general rule of thumb is always pick the main event. If you get 5 rounds, it's just like it's a way better chance that it ends up being fight of the night. But yeah, I'm just going to stick with it because I already wrote it down. So Stevie Ray, Paul Felder. I do think it's a very close fight, so it could end up being fight of the night. Performances, I picked Cynthia Cavillo to get a first-round submission, and so she will be on my performance podium. I'm also going to pick Bafando as well, just because I think she's that much better than Ward. So that's my picks. Nick, bring us home.
Alrighty, my fight of the night will go to Danny Roberts and Bobby Nash. Wes, who did you give? Because I heard you mention that fight, but did you give it to that or no?
I gave it to the main event, but I was saying that the top three and then probably the Danny Roberts Bobby Nash fight would be probably a more likely pick for a fight of the night just based off the stylistic matchup.
Right. My pick is Roberts Nash, but again, Nelson Ponzinibbio a bit tempting just because I find it difficult. I can't, tempt myself that'll be that good just because I don't really see the grappling exchanges to be miraculous or whatever, and I don't really think the striking exchanges because it's not really close anywhere. Nelson should have a pretty big advantage grappling, and Ponzinibbio has a big advantage striking. So I don't see it being a super fun back and forth fight, but nonetheless, should be interesting. Roberts and Nash, though, take on fight tonight. My performances will go to Jack Marshman and Khalil Roundtree Jr. for TKO victories against James and Craig, respectively. That does it for our bonuses. Let's move on to DraftKings. Jed, we'll start with you. Who are your 6 fighters on your DraftKings team?
Yeah, I was talking all big and bad like I was going to take the title, but as I look at my team, you might be sitting comfortable. I don't know who your squad is, who you're rolling with in your squad, but yeah, I'm not loving what my decisions are here. So I have got Bafando on my squad. I have both of my performance of the night picks. So I have both Bafando and Cavillo on my team. And then despite, oh man, go to Wes because I really hate this team, so I'm gonna fix it. So
all right, Wes. Jed is trying to beat me. I mean, he's giving everything
my team
he
is
can.
so bad. So go to Wes.
I do. When we come back to you, I do want to hear what that old team is. So remember what it is for me, and then you can say your new team. But anyways, before we go to Jed, go back to him, I should say, Wes, 6 fighters, DraftKings shouldn't be too difficult. Jed, I know, find something difficult, but Wes, bring us, do you got your DraftKings team?
Yeah, I haven't had too much luck with DraftKings the past probably couple months, and I had a good chance with 213, but I didn't have Wi-Fi where I work, so I wasn't able to change one of the fighters I had that pulled out.
Well, yeah, you would have won if you were able to take Shevchenko out of there
Yep.
and say
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
Bilal Muhammad would have been the
Bilal
next
Muhammad was
choice.
the easy port in, cost the same as Shevchenko, and West would have been the winner, but close ain't
yeah,
close no cigar.
yeah. Oh well, hopefully I can pick it up this week, and I'm actually kind of confident in my team. I'm not too sure, but I actually have Galore Bafando. My two performances, just like you, but Galore Bafando and
What?
Danny Henry. I think that he'll be able to defeat Daniel Tamer. I've got Gunnar Nelson. I definitely had to pick somebody in that main event because Gunnar has scored 82.7 points on average in DraftKings, so I sided with Gunnar Nelson. I picked Alexandre Pantoja. I thought that if he has a good game plan and could take advantage of the poor takedown defense of Neil Siri, he can maybe get a submission in there, get a few extra points. And then the one I had to take a little risk on, but a fighter that I did pick to win that I think both of you didn't pick, I picked Bobby Nash. I think if Bobby Nash can go in there and fight with a smart game plan, it can win. But that's going to be, I think, the deciding factor on if I can take DraftKings or not this week, just because we didn't see Bobby Nash have a good game plan last time. Hopefully he can utilize it a little bit this time.
All right. Jed, have you managed to
I've got a squad that I don't hate.
All right.
I still don't love it, but so I'm sticking with the Galore Bafando, Cynthia Calvillo squad. Those two hold my team down since they're my performance bonuses. Also tacked in amongst them, Justin Willis. We all picked him, I think, and I expect him to get a stoppage win, so that's usually worth some points. Brett Johns is a recent addition to the team. I know I said the Morales fight is close, but Brett Johns is a wrestler and they give a lot of points for takedowns. So if he just like lands 6 takedowns in the fight or whatever, I will rack up the points with that. And to make those kind of costly guys tie in together, I have gone with Ponzinibbio, who's stupidly cheap, and Danny Henry, who both underdogs I'm picking on the card. The team I had, I don't remember exactly, but Brett Johns wasn't on the squad. And instead of Brett Johns, I didn't have Brett Johns or Ponzinibbio on it, and I had who was it? I had Danny Roberts, but then I had to make up for that with another like really low issue. I think I had Ryan James to try and make up the different there, and I really didn't want Ryan James on my team, so that's my squad.
Alrighty, my team is this. Since if you had been following along with odds right by you, you would have noticed that I did not pick a single underdog on this card, so that's a bit rare. I usually there's at least usually 1 or 2 guys that are plus money that I favor, and oftentimes I come up short there. But here we go, all favorites. So I have to go against a couple of my picks on my team, but overall I'm somewhat happy with it. I'm going Galore Bafando. Again, a fade on Charlie Ward. Ward's not good. Bafando seems to hit hard and get a lot of knockouts, so that could do good things. I'm going Paul Craig. I picked Roundtree Jr. by knockout, so as far as my actual pick goes, I don't expect Craig to rack up a lot of points, but he has a chance of doing so because, again, it's either going to be him by submission over Roundtree or it'll be Roundtree by knockout over Craig. So, he has about a 45 – I give him a 45% chance pretty much of racking up a lot of points. So that was worth it for me at a fairly cheap price. Jack Marshman, I got all day over Ryan James. Albert Morales was the other guy where, Brett Johns, I think he grinds on Morales for 3 rounds, and I'm kind of not thinking Morales racks up a ton, but it's a close-ish matchup. Morales could surprise and keep it on the feet and get at least a few points. So he is the cheapest guy on the card. So I got him just because I have a few big favorites. Pantoja, I got over Neil Seary, whether that's a submission or just a lot of points, wrestling, and a bit of striking. And I got Leslie Smith because she's a scrapper, and even though she probably won't finish, I expect her to rack up a number of points on the feet. So that's it. Bufano, Craig, Marshman, Morales, Pantoja, and Leslie Smith to wrap it up. And that does it. Episode 75 of Before the Battle is in the rearview mirror. Thank you, everybody, for watching as always. Jed and Wes, it's a pleasure as always. Jed, let the people know where they can find you on social media, where they can find your writing, your podcast, and anything else you would like to plug.
Follow me on Twitter at Jed Meshew. I write every day at MMAfighting.com, and my podcast is the Naked Truth Podcast, co-hosted with now Nick's colleague at Bloody Elbow, the Naked Gambler. We just dropped our episode. I already mentioned it earlier in this episode of this show, but we dropped our most recent episode discussing Amanda Nunes and doing a little deep dive into the absurdities of Tapology for a little bit. On yesterday, and the links up on my Twitter or TNG's Twitter. We're pretty proud of this episode, so give it a look-see and keep checking in, because next week we're planning to have a guest, and it should be very fun.
His name is not Nick Baldwin, so it shouldn't be too fun.
I already talked to you enough, motherfucker.
Yeah, it is true.
I run two other podcasts. I don't want to have a third.
All right, fair enough. Wes, let the people know where they can find you on social media, where they can find your writing, and anything else you'd like to plug.
You can find me on Twitter at AllThatMMA. That's where I do all my social media communication. And you can also find my writing over at MMAsucker.com. Haven't been too active recently. Hoping to hop back on it a little bit more soon after I finish the summer school class that I have. But besides that, that's it. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Alrighty, you guys can find me on the Twitter at Nick Baldwin MMA. If you'd like to like or friend me on Facebook, go for it, and I'll probably decline you, but try it out and see what happens. You can find my writing over at bloodyelbow.com. You can find my other podcasts I hosted partly with Andrew Lawrence and partly Jed Meshew. It is called The MMA Circus. See, Jed, now you're not just a guest co-host. Now you're like part co-host, and you're moving on up in the world. You're moving on up in the world.
I'm the substitute co-host, but at some point when you sub in more than the regular host is there, you just get called up for the job.
I suppose. Anyways, this past week, Jed, wow, surprise, he was a guest co-host this week. We also had Volkan Ozdemir and Cody Stamann on the show. Volkan, of course, is coming up against Jimmy Manuwa, UFC 214, and Cody Stamann just defeated Tyron Ware in his debut at featherweight, UFC 213 on Fight Pass, so go check it out. I did a bunch of interviews today. They will all be on episode 120 of the MMA Circus next week. I talked to Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, Kurt Hollabaugh, and Boston Salmon. They both earned UFC contracts with wins on Tuesday night on Fight Pass just a few days ago.
Onyewu got screwed.
What's that?
Onyewu or Onyewu, whatever, he got screwed.
Yeah, I think so too. I also talked to Drakkar Klose, who defeated Mark Jacasey at the Ultimate Fighter 25 finale this past weekend. I also talked to Rob Font, who defeated Douglas Silva do Andrade this past weekend at UFC 213. And I talked to Linton Vassell, who does not have a fight coming up, but he's not thrilled about not having a fight with Ryan Bader booked. He should. He's on 3-fight winning streak, 2 wins over former champions. Should be next in line. And
who else is Bader going to fight you?
Well, the thing is, this was actually recorded like 2 hours before King Mo and Liam McGarry was announced. And so that kind of ruined the interview because a lot of it was, hey, Linton, King Mo is probably going to fight Bader, according to Scott Coker. That sucks for you. What are your thoughts?
Seems like Linton's getting that fight now, though, doesn't it?
And so now it does. And by the time this is up late next week, because I'm off camping tomorrow for a few nights. So we're doing the circus a bit late. We're doing it on Thursday. It'll be out Friday. By then, Bader Linton's 100% going to be booked, and the whole interview is going to be ruined. But go listen anyways. Thank you, as always, everybody. That is it for us on episode 75 of Before the Battle. Go check us out. Enjoy the fights. Talk later. Peace out.
Love you guys.